Hello, everyone, and welcome to Univest Insurance's webinar, What Businesses Can Expect from the Biden Administration. We are very excited to have you with us today. We have an event that is chock full of information. We have three speakers participating today. A number of folks from Univest here. The first up today will be a business insurance update. On the commercial side of things with Reggie Reiter, our senior vice president and leader of that group. He will then lead into our core presentation today by Michael Trachtman. Michael's an attorney and the director at Wisler Pearlstine, and he will talk about the practical impact of the recent election, recent activity, and basically that's where the title comes from, what businesses can expect from the Biden administration. Michael's been with us before, is very well spoken and knowledgeable on these issues, and I think there'll be a lot of note taking during the presentation. Actually, during all three today, and then we'll wrap it up. We'll move from Michael into an employee benefits landscape update with Vice President and Senior Consultant on the employee benefits side, Kevin Davis. Many of you have probably heard Kevin speak before. So again, we've got a lot of information and speakers today. They will come on video when they are up to speak. If you have questions, hold those until the end, and we will deal with questions then. Another one of my colleagues will come on and handle questions. So a lot of moving parts today. Great presentation. Okay, so first, just a quick reminder about today's session. We are recording it. It's not for dissemination outside of this presentation. These materials are proprietary to Univest Financial, Univest Financial Corporation, and so we will, with that quick disclaimer, we will move on, and we will start, as I said earlier, with Reggie Reiter, who is our commercial lines team leader.
All right, ready to go, Greg. Thank you for the introduction.
Thanks,
and welcome everybody. So I'm going to jump in and spend a couple of minutes talking about the business insurance impact of a new administration. And I think it's important to start with an update on kind of where things stand today. So the current state of the property and casualty insurance market, if I had to use one word to describe it, it's disrupted right now. Right now, we're in what's called a hard market state. So we've been there for about a year. I foresee it probably at least going through the end of this year and likely into 2022. There's four areas that are really truly the recipe for this, of how we got to this hard market state. So I'll back up for a second. So the insurance marketplace oscillates between soft markets and hard markets. And all you need to understand is, in a soft market cycle, the insurance companies focus on growth. They want to wrap their arms around as many policies as they possibly can. In a hard market state, the focus goes away from growth, and it's more on underwriting profitability. So they're looking at their book of business, and they're doing what they can in order to make sure that book of business is profitable to the company. So you've got four things here that really truly are the recipe for where today in that hard market state. First, COVID-19, obviously it's impacting everyone. It's also impacting the insurance industry. There's certainly claims coming in. There's claims that have been accepted. There's claims that have been denied. There's a lot more that has to happen here before we know the ultimate disposition on whether certain claims are going to be covered. You've got legislative and social pressure on the insurance industry. And finally, you've got uncertainty of the total impact and duration of COVID-19. The worst enemy of the insurance industry is uncertainty. So when you inject this type of uncertainty into a marketplace that was already hardening before the pandemic hit, it just adds to more volatility. The second piece is reduced underwriting income from years of suppressed rates. So in growth mode, insurance companies tend to lower rates in order to acquire more business. Well, that impacts profitability, leading to the hard market. The third item, the continuation of the low interest rate environment. We have been in this low interest rate environment for a very long time. It doesn't look like it's going to change much potentially in 2021. So that certainly has an impact on the insurance company's profitability measure. A lot of the income that insurance company makes is on investment income from the premiums that they take in and they invest, and then the interest that they make on that investment. And then finally, social inflation concerns. The easiest way I can define this is these are these like toxic judgments that we see out in the marketplace where you'll see a claim settle for $200 million. And what happens is that usually there's more social influence on that ultimate outcome versus merit-based. So a jury might be looking to make an example of somebody or of some company almost in a punitive manner. Well, ultimately, those claim payments are made by the insurance companies. And we've had a hard time projecting these costs into the future because these social inflation types of claims have really started to expand outside of city areas and urban areas. Now we're talking into suburbs and into Main Street America. So finally, the impact on you as the business insurance buyers. You're looking at substantial premium increases. And just to give you an idea, so Market Scout, which is one of the items that we follow here, publishes a quarterly review every quarter of what's the composite rate increase that our commercial insurance buyers should be expecting overall across all lines of business, across all industry. Q4 was the highest in 6 quarters at 7.1%. So in that 7.1%, if anybody has worked on their umbrella or their excess liability renewal, your commercial auto, if you've got a fleet of auto, your business autos, but also now to your professional lines, your directors and officers coverage, your employment practices liability, your cyber insurance. These lines of business are seeing increases up to 30, 40% that we have seen. So you're certainly feeling an impact on those more distressed lines of business, but overall the market is pushing out some additional rate increases. The underwriting appetites of insurance companies are shrinking, right? So we go back to the hard market. They're taking their books of businesses. They're wanting to keep things on the books. They're wanting to keep risks on the books that are making money. So 5 years ago, they may have been okay with your metal manufacturer, but now today, that insurance company might not be okay with writing that, and they may issue a non-renewal. Or finally, they may write it, but they may add some restrictive forms and endorsements that might make it a little less favorable. So as you can tell, the insurance companies, when they get into a hard market, they tend to want to shrink their books. They want to make as much money as they can on that and return to profitability. Next slide. So the Biden administration impact on business insurance. I am not expecting any knee buckling changes for the property and casualty business. And the reason why is because our industry is heavily regulated at the state level, which ultimately limits and blunts the impact of any federal level action, which is fantastic for us. So we were likely not going to see any sort of major increases or major programs at the federal level that are going to impact us here in the state of PA or Jersey or Delaware. But there's some things to keep an eye on that could certainly have an impact at the state level, which would ultimately impact you. First, corporate tax rate increases. We just got done talking about profitability. Well, obviously, it looks like President-elect Biden is looking to increase some of those corporate tax rates. So the insurance companies are already stretched thin and from a profitability perspective, and they're struggling to make the adequate profitability measures. Certainly, we could see more pressure on the underwriting income, which is more pressure on the individual risks to make money. Increased pressure for the industry to establish a pandemic insurance program. If anybody was on the webinar that we hosted back in October, I spoke at length about this. President-elect Biden will make a larger push to the industry to come up with some sort of pandemic insurance plan for the future. It's not going to be something that's retroactive, but he's going to look to the insurance industry to come up with something. It's not going to pick up every single dollar for losses, but there could be a baseline for coverage. There's a lot of work to be done here. My guess is this is not going to be ready for at least a couple of years. And I think there needs to be global support in this, not just domestic here in the US. The third point, increased regulations and enforcement from OSHA. President Trump was lax with OSHA regulation. We've had, I would say, a lower than normal number of inspectors on the payroll. Plus, we haven't had a director for OSHA in a bit. So President Biden definitely is focused on increasing those regulations and also the enforcement, looking to add to the staff and also looking to name a new director. And this is really important too, because as anybody knows, if you have OSHA problems and you're getting OSHA fines, they can be Very, very expensive. And if you're in the energy sector, that's the one I'm looking at right now as potentially being the most impacted by this. So either if you're directly in the energy sector, or if you have contracts with anybody in the energy sector, just keep your eye on this, because there certainly could be some more things coming that could impact your business model. And then finally, social justice reform and the challenges to risk-based pricing models. What I'm taking from this is there's some of the states, right now there's 29 states that are, there's pressure on the insurance companies to really evaluate their models they're using to evaluate risk. And this is not out of the norm. Usually when a new administration comes in, folks want to make sure that they're following all protocol and practices, not having any sort of discriminatory underwriting. So I'm not overly concerned. What makes this more interesting during this transition is strictly due to the amount of social justice reform that I know President-elect Biden, as a part of his platform, is going to push onto businesses to be more socially responsible. And what I'm looking for is these models that the insurance companies are using are well developed, and they've been using for a while, and they've likely made some underwriting income on those. If you start pulling things out of those models, or even putting things into those models that can change the variability of expected losses, that just adds to the volatility on an individual risk basis. And it could lead to some additional price increases as we get into 21 and 22. Next slide. So finally, what can you do? I mean, how do you prepare yourself for the impacts of the incoming administration? The most simple thing I can tell you is a mindset change. Is just control your destiny. Focus your energy and your efforts internally to cut through all the external noise. Make yourself the best in class, and you'll be able to cut through a lot of the other things that are going on outside of your world. Some of the folks within our shop, our clients that are very, very good at doing this, are strategy based versus transaction based when they look at insurance. So, we're talking about sitting down with your broker, putting together a 3-year, a 5-year plan of how you can organically and in a partnership help you reduce your insurance premiums by doing the right things from a safety, from a loss control, from a risk management standpoint, versus a transaction-based protocol, which is more, hey, shop my premiums every year, see if you can save me 3%, and I'm going to make that move to that next carrier. I think folks that are strategy-based are going to be able to absorb some of the things that we know and some of the things that we don't know that are coming from a new administration. Reviewing and refreshing your safety and risk management protocols. This goes back to the OSHA changes. It's the time now to take a look at what you are doing and maybe what you're not doing to be compliant with OSHA, because I promise you there's going to be a harder look at what is out there today from a regulation standpoint, and very likely, especially in the energy sector, there's going to be some pretty big changes coming your way. I mentioned before, aim to be best in class and partner with the right broker. Look, insurance is designed to pay claims. And even if you are the absolute best and you have the most robust safety program and you have the best risk management principles, you are still going to have claims. But the key with working with the right broker, like a Univest Insurance, is we're able to take that information of what you've done to invest in that culture of safety and what you have implemented in your shop and how you've let it permeate down through the organization. You're going to have claims. We will be able to explain to the right carrier that this was an anomaly, that this is something that they're doing all of the right things. And ultimately, the outcome would be, we're hoping to keep your rates as suppressed as possible, keep you more in line, keep you competitive for that next renewal and for the foreseeable future. And finally, be engaged, but be patient. Our best clients ask us questions in this process. They want to know why certain things are what they are. They like to know what they're paying for. And some folks have a deeper understanding, some folks don't. But as a decision maker in the business, be engaged in the process and be patient too. If you've had loss history and you've had some claims, it takes years to get out from underneath that rock. That's why we prefer to be more proactive when we're putting together strategy-based insurance portfolios versus reactionary based. So be patient, give it time. That goes back to the power of partnering with the right broker, because over time, a good plan with good execution is going to come to a good outcome. So that's all I had for my section. What I'll do now is I'll pass it over to Mike to get into the nuts and bolts, take a deeper dive from a more broader business perspective. Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Reggie. Thank you all. Thank you to Univest for giving me this opportunity. I've been doing this for 40 years. That is, over 40 years, dedicated my professional life to the representation as a lawyer of small businesses. So I've got some perspective, but today we are in as easily as a tumultuous and unpredictable time as I've ever seen. And we've had to represent the vagaries of small business from post-Vietnam War to 9/11 through the recession to all sorts of things. It gives us all some perspective, and part of that perspective is this, that it will be much better if we focus on how to prepare and how to position a business for the future rather than imagining that you can create defined hard plans. It's preparation and it's positioning. And that's what I'm going to try to focus on in the allotted time I have, how to prepare and how to position to make the most success out of what is likely coming down the pike over the next couple of years. Having said that, we get to where we are today post January 6th. I think January 6th is going to go down as something equivalent to 9/11 in terms of a shorthand of an inflection point, a point when everything changed in the country, perhaps not to the extent of 9/11, although that remains to be seen, but a lot changed. Before January 6th, we knew we were transitioning from the Trump administration, which had its perspectives, to the Biden administration, which had a whole class of different perspectives. But we had no idea that we would get to the point that we got by the end of January 6th as we try to prepare for and position small businesses to move forward. Next, please. The first inflection point that we reached on January 6th was notice of the Georgia runoffs, of which I'm sure you're all probably aware. The significance of this is something that nobody would have, or very few pundits, predicted in September or October, and that is that the Democrats, that not only that Biden would be elected, but that we have a Democratic president and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, that the Democratic Party would control not only the presidency, but also the House and Senate. And that's a monumental change. And what it means, as a practical matter, as we plan for and prepare for the Biden administration, is that which was outside the reach of the Biden administration, or so they thought, in November and December, as they plan to move forward, now is within the reach of the Biden administration. And that is monumentally important. So the dynamics of compromise between the Democrats and the Republicans have changed. Now the Democrats are holding all the cards. They went from a pair of nines to a full house in terms of bargaining and horse trading for what the Biden administration in its platform and then moving forward has wanted. The dynamics of who compromises and who can get what, given the current bargaining leverage that each side has completely changed in favor of the Democrats. And that's big news for the small business plans of the Biden administration. That means that the cabinet selections can become approved much more quickly, although there's this thing of an impeachment trial that's perhaps going to stand in the way of that in terms of accelerating that through, but certainly much more quickly than if we were deadlocked in a Republican-controlled Senate. The federal agencies, Department of Labor, the EPA, HHS, et cetera, all those agencies will get their heads confirmed. There will be significant appointments to the judiciary that are much different than the appointments that President Trump made, and perhaps most significant at all, the legislative agenda of the Biden administration as it applies to privately held businesses moving forward, and the regulatory agenda of the Biden administration as it moves forward will very drastically change than anything they thought that they had in reach previous to January 6th. Next slide. Now, having said that, this gentleman may be the most powerful person in America. You may have thought it was President Biden, and of course it is, but in many respects, this gentleman will be the most powerful person in America. This is Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. He is a Democratic senator, but he frequently aligns with the Republicans. He's a conservative Democrat who frequently disagrees with the mainstream positions of much of what his fellow Democrats may align for in terms of not only business policies, but social policies. There's a couple other senators who somewhat align with Joe Manchin as well. New Senator Cinnamon out of Arizona, Angus King out of Maine. The point is that even though right now the Senate, as a result of the Georgia runoffs, is 50-50 tied with Vice President Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote, so one may think that the Democrats would be able to control the Senate with that alignment. There's not going to be clear sailing because Joe Manchin and a couple of the other senators are not always going to align with everything that the Democrats want. So to the extent that people were fearing a so-called radical left-wing social agenda and unfettered spending, et cetera, that's not going to happen because Joe Manchin's not going to let it happen. He's already stood up in opposition for the $2,000 checks for the stimulus relief package, et cetera. So keep an eye on Joe Manchin, also Senator Sinema, also Senator Angus King. These people will put the brakes on much of what you may have otherwise heard the Democrats may want to push through, and that's going to affect small business, although Joe Manchin is a big proponent of small business. Next, please. So what is the effect of the second major inflection point that occurred on January 6th, a point in history that has rivals 9/11 in my judgment in terms of its significance for our democracy? From a small business and a legislative and regulatory point of view, what does it mean? No one really knows what it means, but there are some possibilities and some indications that we all need to keep an eye on as we plan and as we prepare and as we position. First of all, since at least 30 years ago, since the days of Newt Gingrich, both Democrats and Republicans, particularly in the Senate, have adopted a position which was that whatever the party in power is for, we're against. And the idea was that as you head to the next set of elections, which is November 8, 2022, the midterm elections, you want to throw as many obstacles as you can if there is a party in power in the path of that party of power so that they look bad, you look good, you can perhaps gain some ground on November 8th, 2022 in the next elections. The question is, has the Capitol invasion changed that strategy? Is the thinking now, maybe this kind of partisanship is not where we should be headed for the country. Maybe we need to position ourselves in a different way. There's a distinct possibility that the thinking will change, and also the campaign funding will change, because that will direct how people in both houses of Congress react. Where's the funding going to come from, and what will the major funders be promoting in terms of how we govern our country moving forward? There's also significant questions as to where President Trump will end up in all of this. Will he continue to be magnetic or will he be radioactive? We don't know. Will he hold on to his base? Will 6 months from now this look like kind of a blip in the radar screen? No big deal. He's got a $100 million war chest to influence politics with, or will he become radioactive? There are criminal prosecutions. We just don't know. But that's a big issue moving forward in terms of how our politics unfold, in terms of the legislative and regulatory agenda that small business needs to be looking forward to. Mitch McConnell will now be the minority. Last time that happened, when Obama was the president, Mitch McConnell's agenda was to do what I had talked about before. If the Democratic administration was for it, McConnell would lead the Republicans against it, just as the Democrats had done to the Republicans in previous times. He's starting to make some noises that maybe he's going to move away from that position, and that could be good news in terms of the efficiency of legislation and regulation. But the question will also be, knowing that they control the White House and the Senate and the Congress and can flex a lot of muscles, will the Democrats take that position, or will the Democrats see the writing on the wall, read the American people in the right way, and meet the Republicans halfway so that things actually get done, and perhaps we depart from extreme partisanship, legislation, regulation for small business gets passed? We don't know, but this is certainly something to monitor. So where are we going to go heading into this substantively? The first thing that's going to happen are executive orders. I'm sure you've read about this quite a bit. The first thing that every president does in modern times is issue a slew of executive orders to the extent that he or she has the power to issue executive orders. It happens on the first day. Expect during the first week, I'm guessing 100 executive orders from the Biden administration. Let's focus on some of those as they affect you. First, in respect to COVID, The Trump administration's plan was basically, let's leave it to the states. The Biden administration is the opposite of that. The Biden administration is that we as the federal government are going to flex our muscles and we are taking over. And that will affect small business quite a bit. You've already seen some hints as to what will happen with the federal vaccination program and testing. There will be national emergency mandates in respect to things like quarantines and super spreader events and the like. Over the course of time, that's not going to be left to the individual governors of individual states. There will be heightened federal enforcement. Reggie mentioned OSHA. I'll mention that again in the future. OSHA will become a primary purveyor of that which is structured to stem the tide of COVID. OSHA has been in the background where it should not have been. OSHA has not had a director or a deputy director to promulgate and enforce policy. There are line items in the budgets which will make, as Reggie pointed out, OSHA a prime actor in all of this. There will be increased enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act for people who claim certain restrictions in terms of their activities because of COVID, remote work, etc. There will be increased enforcement of retaliation laws in respect to people who claim that by complaining about the lack of COVID enforcement, they've been compromised in their workplace. Look out for that. ADA and retaliation education, planning, preparation, positioning will be very important. The Defense Production Act will be implicated in terms of manufacturing PPE and other requirements of the COVID era. Unilateral exercises of power by the federal government will be the watchword in the COVID world early on. The next category of executive orders will be categorized as small business assistance packages. And let's take a minute to deal with this because it's important. The Biden administration is geared toward utilizing a maximum level of executive orders to assist small businesses in certain ways. And those small businesses who are positioned to take advantage of the executive orders that will likely come down the turnpike here, and those who are prepared, set up infrastructure-wise, to take advantage of the executive orders that the Biden administration is planning pretty quickly, can prosper out of what's happening, as opposed to those who may be left behind. So keep in mind certain philosophical principles that or policy principles really that the Biden administration wishes to promote here. In terms of federal contracting, lots of federal contracting will be geared to favoring small businesses, minority business enterprises, businesses in disadvantaged areas. Much of the federal contracting will serve the dual purpose of building infrastructure, for example, but doing it to the benefit of small businesses, MBEs, and disadvantaged area businesses. Federal contracting will be awarded to companies who toe certain policy lines. Companies that fail to pay a $15 an hour minimum wage, for example, may be barred or restricted from lots of federal contracting. Companies that seem to outsource jobs to foreign countries, companies that are guilty of what the administration may define as union busting, those are going to be hurdles to participating in a federal contracting boom. Federal infrastructure projects are going to be a huge aspect of federal contracting, and that is being done not only to refurbish the infrastructure, but to channel money to small businesses who can participate in infrastructure projects, and in a very significant way, who can do so in an environmentally friendly way. There will be infrastructure projects channeled to businesses and small businesses in particular who operate green, as the government will define that. There will be federal regulations in terms of buy clean, buy American. That too will influence who gets the federal contracting dollars. Prepare, position for that. Federal regulations with respect to the increased limits on greenhouse gases. I think 5 minutes before this started, I think a federal appeals court just invalidated some of the Trump administration's regulations, which opened up greenhouse gases more. I'm going to read a little bit more about that, but by executive order, the Biden administration will immediately, to the extent possible, restore the limits on greenhouse gas restrictions, restore the limits on the use of fossil fuels, rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. So companies that are geared, positioned, prepared for that will get the federal contracting dollars. In terms of those of you who are concerned about tariffs, the Biden administration is geared toward free trade, they say, but President Biden is playing it close to his vest with respect to China. Don't expect anything to change on the China tariffs anytime soon. That's still a political football, and I think that will probably stay in place for now. Next slide, please. So be prepared, and I'm going to go through a series of slides, the focus of which is to be prepared. Be prepared for small business relief packages that are going to be introduced through Congress and I think pushed through because there seems to be a lot of bipartisan support for this. And where there's not, I think Senator Manchin and those who are otherwise on the fence are going to support the Biden administration in terms of increasing the dollars towards small businesses. The Biden administration wants to promote what they've called a Main Street recovery package for very small entrepreneurs, very small businesses. So if you're in that camp, stay informed with respect to those packages. There will be grant programs, not loan programs exclusively, but grant programs for businesses that can show that they were damaged through certain limits as the result of COVID. There will be COVID compliance assistance, companies that require grants in order to comply with the more aggressive OSHA-oriented COVID restrictions. There will be grant programs that you will need to be informed about. There will be, it's planned, an opportunity fund for businesses in disadvantages, depressed areas, and again, minority business enterprises. And there will be, or at least there is the plan to drastically expand the PPP loan program and also expand into other forms of SBA loans, EIDL loans, and other loans. There's the new head of the SBA has a very aggressive track record in respect to making loans and grants available to small businesses. I think you're going to see a lot of change and a lot of creativity here. And the key will be to stay informed about it so that you can jump on it, because some of this will be a first come, first served business. And there will be an awful lot of opportunities for small businesses that can promote climate change initiatives as well. So again, position, prepare for that. Next slide, please. Be prepared with respect to work sites. Talked about this a little bit. Reggie talked about it a little bit. I can't stress it enough. Your work site in the COVID era will become a primary venue for new rules, new regulations, new laws, changes, and increased enforcement activity. There will be national employer standards, not just state crazy quilts of standards in terms of protective equipment and distancing, sanitation, and employee training, air movement standards, quarantining. Again, be informed. The penalties will be ramped up for violations. This is one of the key agenda items that the Biden administration has promoted, is that I think we're going to be looking to make some examples out of some businesses pretty quick with respect to this, because that's the best way that they can send the message. So be prepared for that. Next slide, please. Worker classification is a huge aspect of the Biden agenda, and it's worth spending just a little bit of time here. A Biden priority has always been very ramped up enforcement and increased penalties for worker misclassification. What do I mean by worker misclassification? Top of the line agenda item here is the misclassification, depending upon the law, of employees as independent contractors. Employers want to classify workers as independent contractors to the best extent that they can, because independent contractors don't get overtime. Independent contractors aren't subject to the ADA and the FMLA and discrimination laws and all the rest of that. It's an overtime. So it's very beneficial to be able to classify workers as independent contractors. Very high priority for the Biden administration is to make it much more difficult to take a worker at your place of business and classify that worker as an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. Lots will change with respect to this. The same will happen with respect to so-called gig workers. There's likely to be, as there is now in California, a hybrid definition which will allow gig workers to obtain certain employment benefits and the benefit of employment laws. We went through this in the Obama administration, the first administration in 2008. It will be a priority of the Biden administration to make it more difficult for you to classify workers as exempt as opposed to non-exempt. That is, to classify workers as exempt from overtime requirements as opposed to non-exempt, where they must be paid overtime for hours in excess of 40 hours a week. The definitional prescriptions with respect to the line between exempt and non-exempt is likely to change. And a lot of this can be done fairly quickly, not utilizing Congress, but through the actions of administrative agencies. So it will be very important for you to keep an eye on this. Next slide, please. Be prepared in respect to paid leave laws. The paid leave that was characteristic of the Families First Coronavirus Release Act expired, as most of you know, I'm sure, on December 31. Biden administration is very keyed into not only restoring but expanding paid leave requirements. This may be somewhat difficult because of the burdens that small business is under now. There may be some horse trading that goes on, but watch out for this in terms of when there's mandatory quarantine, for example, when an employee has been exposed to COVID or has COVID and there's a mandatory quarantine where there's childcare responsibilities, watch out for heightened paid leave requirements. Watch out for some changes in the FMLA. I think that's going to happen in the latter stages, not on an emergency basis. Always watch out for the states and cities on this, because even if the federal government doesn't jump on it, lots of states and cities are. So the concept of paid leave is something that you need to be prepared for, that you may need to plan for, but certainly you need to stay informed about the possibilities. Next slide, please. Be prepared about increased opportunities for unionization. Biden is a self-proclaimed union man. This occurred during the first Obama administration as well, and then got ramped back as the Congress turned Republican in the second Biden administration. But the agenda here is to make it much easier for employees to unionize a place of business. The new Secretary of Labor, former Mayor of Boston, is a union organizer, and he was appointed for a reason. So be very careful with respect to this. Be mindful of it. The National Labor Relations Board will be involved, but not right away, because the members don't flip for a couple of years. On that, they're civil service appointees. Essentially, they don't serve at the will of the president. But the increased opportunities to unionize, and there are anti-union vaccinations, if you will, if you are of that mind, where you can limit the possibilities of unionization in a lawful way that's beneficial for your workers. That could be done, and it's something that you need to prepare for and position for if that is something that concerns you. Next slide, please. Be prepared for non-competes. And this is a drum that I've been beating, and those of you who know me know that I've been beating this drum for a while because I think it's important. Lots of companies that I've represented over the course of decades rely on certain key employees that make the difference in their business. They're the people who know the key sales targets. They're the people who know the key operating methodologies or the key technologies. And the easiest way to take a failing business and make it a successful business is look at the other businesses in your industry sector and take the key employees of the more successful businesses and hire them if you can. And the bulwark against that has historically been non-competes in employment agreements. And I'm telling you that the efficacy of those are fading. Biden administration is opposed to them. There's an opportunity for the Federal Trade Commission to get involved and significantly ratchet back the utilization of non-competes. There are alternatives. You'll need to concert with the people who do this for a living in terms of other incentives that will keep your employees on board by virtue of a carrot as opposed to a stick. But you will need to ramp down your confidence in non-competes if your business is one that relies on certain key employees to continue to succeed. Be very careful with respect to this. I think just the other day, the District of Columbia passed its own legislation significantly limiting non-competes. Be prepared for this. Again, be positioned for the future on this. Next slide, please. So the plan in terms of where we go. To the extent we can plan, I think we need to focus on four things, one of which is not to put a specific plan on paper and begin to implement it because the circumstances will change. It's just simply inevitable. We are at a time of great uncertainty in the country. As I pointed out, we don't know where some of those inflection points exactly will lead. It'll calm down eventually, but exactly in which directions and who has what leverage in favor of what, we don't quite know yet. So number one key in terms of what I recommend to you all, and I've recommended to my clients over the last couple of years as things have changed dramatically during that period, stay informed. There are resources that you can utilize to stay informed. Webinars like this serve a great public service. And again, I thank Univest for allowing me to be involved in this sort of thing. I think it's of great help to the business community. Number two, be nimble. Don't get locked in to a plan of attack because the foundation for that plan of attack may evaporate at any given time. Surprises are in the wind, and we, by virtue of the fact and by virtue of the nature of surprises, we don't know exactly what they are, but I'm telling you that unexpected things are going to be happening. So be informed, be nimble, be compliant. Just to segue a little bit in something that Reggie talked about in terms of compliance, there's going to be a heavy duty push on enforcement, something in the nature of compliance that you may want to focus on in addition to getting the right resources in place in terms of expert advice so that you can comply, is, for example, employment practices liability insurance. You can turn to Univest for that. But that's something that backs you up in the event that you get caught short in the effort to comply with the employment practices changes that are going to be coming down the roads that we're all going to have to travel here. So informed, nimble, compliant, and then ultimately, and Reggie made this point as well, be strategic. Don't be reflexive. Don't act quickly. Take the advice of advisors who have been down these paths before. Combine it all with a strategy, not necessarily a locked-in plan, but a strategy. We'll get through it. I wish you the best. Stay well. Turn it over to Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. And stepping off of what Mike just closed on, the theme of my few benefits slides, go ahead, Greg, are going to be compliance, staying compliant, focusing on the incoming Biden administration's signaling that they plan to have more ACA compliance enforcement, which means I need to then also talk about cost strategy, because this graph from Kaiser Family Foundation, which gets updated every year, does track this dueling strategy and dueling challenge the employers we work with are facing, which is that they need to follow the guidelines of the minimum essential benefits they must offer, yet this is the reality on average of the cost increases people have been facing in the employee benefit space for the last 20 years. So I'm going to start with from 2008 through 2016 and just sort of look at the last time when Obama and Biden were the administration and the ACA got passed. Obviously, the cost did not go down $2,500 per family per year, as was promised. So I don't expect any reduction. And as you can see, they didn't reduce in the next 4 years either. So I think what we need to take from that is we unfortunately are looking at a continuation trend. Go ahead, Greg. So we like to look at cost through this lens, which is that you can take the least amount of risk and potentially cost the most, which is on the far left side there, fully insured, which the majority of the employers we work with, under 200 employees or so tend to go there. But the growing trend, and I expect we will see more growth of this under this new administration, is to go to the right of that bucket. And now 60% of all employers are doing some version of self-insuring. So whether they start by integrating a HRA strategy, which we can certainly talk to your company about, or gap insurance strategy, we've had success with both of those in reducing fully insured costs by taking on some additional risk. Then you can do things like level and minimum premium. A number of under 50 employee companies have gone with level funding and have seen the advantage of that. Graded funding is similar to level funding. It's like prepaying maximum rates, but getting the cash flow advantage of all claims coming in below the maximum. We have seen a lot of success recently, and a couple of my customers on this call today have done this. They've joined a reinsurance group consortium, and they have seen the advantages, the flexibility, avoiding the health insurance fee and other state mandates that are part of the fully insured carrier-based rate, and instead renting an insurance carrier network, designing their plan to meet the guidelines, and benefiting from any surplus claims. And then there's pure self-insurance, which kind of gives you all of those things, but you take on the most risk. So we just want to make sure as you talk to your Univest consultant that you know we're looking at your cost opportunities through this lens and through that prior graph to make sure we're pointing out the different pros and cons. So the next slide will walk you through some of the self-insurance pros and cons. Go ahead, Greg. And then this is really what it is you need to know in a nutshell, which is that you can bend your curve of your claims costs through self-insuring by, in essence, betting on yourself instead of joining in with a pool or a community-rated group of employers, blending your claims risk, meaning you may in fact be subsidizing other employers and they may be subsidizing you. Instead, you're really just, for example, in a reinsurance consortium, you can partially fund, protect yourself with the guardrails of well-designed reinsurance, which has good protection for individual high claimants and for your companies, maximum expected costs. Then you are in a think win-win scenario. My favorite author for business books is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I really, truly believe think win-win is really a strategy you should always be looking at purchasing benefits through. And we can certainly help you at Univest look at it that way. And then again, there are some of those advantages of alternate funding or self-funding and reducing your taxes, reduction in eliminating carrier profit. We sent out a newsletter recently that there's more transparency laws that have recently been passed with the over 5,000-page stimulus package that was just passed, and we can help you with that as well. And then also get you to a more favorable rating method that benefits from this current COVID phenomenon that we're still in of people obtaining less preventive care, less selective surgeries, less screening, which has a short-term benefit potentially of low cost now, but there is a long-term risk that we're going to want to protect you from as well, which could be not detected cancer or not fully managed wellness programs to help people reduce their underlying health conditions, which is really, again, a win-win strategy we would want to talk to you guys about. And go ahead, Greg, on to compliance. So Javier Becerra has been named as the incoming HHS Secretary to replace Alex Azar. Like the OSHA comments that were previously brought up, ACA has also really not been a huge challenge these past 4 years the same way it was the 8 years prior to that. So we really, in a lot of ways, what's old is new again. And as Plato said 2,000 years ago, necessity is the mother of invention. You really have been looking at these alternate funding strategies and self-funded strategies as one alternative. And then the other has been, well, how do I meet ACA compliance and still be a competitive employer and not have my costs go up beyond affordability? So we really give you the guardrails here too. So I just have a couple pages. We have a checklist that anyone that invited you from Univest could help you with. It's really just 4 pages long. Here are some high-level things to keep in mind. We're most likely going to stop extending deadlines or being told, oh, don't really worry about ACA compliance. You're going to really need to have a robust strategy in place, probably with your payroll vendor. But if not, if you'd like us to be involved in giving advice on vendors we recommend, we would be happy to do that. Also, Jim Devine is going to close out this presentation, can assist with an ACA compliance audit of your business and a general HR audit. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, just make sure, in addition to your filing requirements, that you are delivering your 1095s and your 1094s in a timely manner, and that you are doing your 1095Bs if you have switched over to one of those self-funding or level funding plans. So we just need to make sure you're filing the right forms. And again, we'll provide you a version of this checklist if you reach out to any of us afterwards. Go ahead, Greg. And lastly, these are really some of the high-level takeaways, which really dovetails nicely into what both Reggie and Nick shared, which is what do you need to be acting on like right now with this incoming administration? And this is very timely because ACA is on a calendar year basis, so we are in this period now, that you really should be maintaining detailed documentation of all your materials. So if you've been lapsed in this area the last few years, you know, it's kind of time to probably take another closer look at this. And then you also need to make sure you're required notices are being distributed, we also do provide that assistance. We have about 4 pages of standard notices that we can provide your business if you would like to see those. And if you are a self-funded plan, you have to self-report your PCORI fees. Those are not built into your medical premium. Or if you have an HRA, sometimes employers have kind of forgotten about that, and that still is around. And then lastly, just, what are you doing as far as making sure you're compliant, making sure your handbook has been recently reviewed, again with COVID, with FSCRA, and so many other laws that have come on the books this past year. It's really important that you're doing a lot of documenting and that you're really protecting your most important asset, which is your business and your employees who work for you. So with that, I am going to hand it back to Jim Devine to help coordinate any Q&A time, and he can direct the questions to any of us 3 panelists that are still on the line. And thank you for your attention.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Kevin. This is Greg. I just wanted to jump in to Jim. If questions have been submitted, Jim will lead us through the questions. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes before we hit the 2 o'clock hour. I want to thank all the presenters today. A lot of information, 3 different perspectives in the same kind of area about the impact of the Biden administration. So I'll give Jim a minute to load up the questions, and he will direct those to either Michael, Reggie, or Kevin, or if it's an HR related question in Jim's wheelhouse, as Jim Devine is our Senior Vice President and Practice Leader of our Human Resource Consulting Group, that he will take that question. So hopefully we've got all the right people to handle the questions here today. So Jim, if you want to jump in, that'd be great.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. And I guess what I'd ask everyone is if you do have questions before you sign off, please use the Q&A. Which I think appears down at the bottom right of the screen. We have at least one here, and this is for Michael. And Mike, the question is: do you see any major changes with the EEOC and the vaccine programs?
Warming up my crystal ball here. The EEOC published a very, very helpful guidance on vaccinations not long ago. It was quite a nice piece of work. The question that is kind of teed up is whether people will be allowed in the workplace who object to vaccinations on religious bases, and that's where the new Supreme Court comes into play. So while right now employers have the right to bar employees if they so choose from the workplace who choose not to get vaccinated, although I don't know if I necessarily recommend that as opposed to other alternatives, which may be beneficial. But if there's going to be changes with respect to that, it's likely going to come from the Supreme Court, and it's worth watching. We have 3 relatively new Supreme Court justices. They've teed up issues with respect to the conflict between religion and law, and nobody can predict how this one is going to come out. Watch it.
Mike, thank you. Yeah, we've had a few questions about the content being made available, and I think it was mentioned at the beginning, but I'll state it again. After we wrap up and we collect all of the participant information, we will send out a link to a replay, and we'll also send out the slide deck as well. So look for that coming in your email soon. And then here's a question about staying informed about small business relief packages. And I'm not sure the specifics of that, but.
Yeah, Jim, I'll take that one.
Okay, sure.
So one of the ways I would recommend, if you'd like to opt in to our monthly HR newsletter, we actually have been sending out monthly email updates with information about things like that. So when PPP loans are made available again, which they were this past week, and also the new legislative updates that happen, we do send those out to people who are interested. So if you want to reach out to your Univest contact, we can make sure we get.
Great, thank you, Kevin. And I would guess that applies to women-owned and disadvantaged businesses as well. any of those relief packages? They're generally small business, but there may also be.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and that almost ventures over a little bit more into financial services, which obviously we are all representing insurance and HR. So we have a COVID information page on our Univest website. So there may be some information there that could be helpful regarding those categories.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen there is that there is currently in place certain regulatory criteria as to how you become a certified minority business enterprise for federal contracting purposes, or a women's business enterprise for federal contracting purposes. And what's going to happen is that when federal contracts are made available, there will be criteria that are promulgated by the federal government in respect to, here's an available federal contract, here are the bidding requirements, and it will be in those bidding requirements. So it's for those of you who are used to dealing with the federal contracting services, just stay tuned to when the federal government publicizes its federal bidding opportunities, and watch for those requirements in terms of MBE and WBE certifications.
Great. Okay. And then Reggie, you're still on. We have a question just to clarify the rate increases that you had talked about. The question is, did I hear correctly that costs could be projected to 30 to 40% increase in premiums?
I would say overall, the costs for an entire portfolio are likely to increase anywhere between 5 and 8%. The average, the composite rate index for quarter 4 for the commercial lines industry was about 7%, a shade over 7%. However, there are definitely certain lines of business that are more distressed than others. The one that I would say is probably going to fall somewhere around 30% would be your commercial umbrella or your excess liability policies. That market's having a real tough time right now. You'll see increases likely above 10% on business auto, so your commercial auto risk. You'll see some increases on your professional liability, your management liability, directors and officers, employment practices liability, cyber liability. There's definitely some additional disruption in those lines of business as well. But overall, expect anywhere between 5 to 8% with some anomalies that I just mentioned.
Thanks, Reg. I think that's it. We didn't have too many questions today, but we did flash up the contact information before, and again, you will get a copy of the slide deck that does have that in there. So if any questions come up later, feel free to get in touch with any of us that are listed in the presentation. And with that, I guess we will close things out and thank everyone for joining us today. We will run another session in March. We'll take February off, but in March we'll run another session, and we'll have information coming out about that soon. So please stay tuned, and we thank you very much for all being here.
Thank you. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.